My name is Corinne Mollel, and this is my final project, the polling case study. In this presentation, I'll be walking you through a complete data analysis for the 2016 US presidential election polls. Let's get into it. The data set comes from the 538 with 12,624 rows of it spread across 27 columns. For this project, I walked through the standard 5 phases of data analysis pipeline, which are get the data, clean it, prepare it for analysis, analyze it, and then visualize the result. Each phase has its own section in my Jupyter notebook. The audience I'm picturing for this analysis is anyone who followed the 2016 race closely. This could be the campaign staff, journalists, political science students, and people who can read charts but don't necessarily write code themselves. The three core questions I wanted to answer were: how did the polling numbers shift month by month? Did the national picture match what was happening in the battleground states? And what were the polling showing in that final week before the election day? Here are 5 specific questions the analysis answered. Question one asks about national polling trends in month to month. Question 2 compares the nation picture to what the swing states were showing. Question 3 looks at whether polling likely voters versus registered voters made a difference. Question 4 zooms into 2 key states, Michigan and Florida, and watches how the gap moved in the final months. And question 5 asks, in the last week before the election, which were the swing states actually leaning? The 5 phases go from left to right: get, clean, prepare, analyze, and visualize. This is the same workflow you would use on almost any real-world data project. It shows you how to avoid mistakes when your data set has 12,000 rows and 27 columns. So we start by getting the data and understand its shape, and then we clean out the noise, and then we engineer the new features that let us ask the right questions, and then we analyze and finally visualize. Phase 1 is loading the CSV and doing an initial exploration. The raw file had 12,000 rows and 27 columns. Of those 27 columns, only 8 turned out to be relevant. States, start and end date column, the pollster's name column, sample size, the population type, and the row numbers for Clinton and Trump. So nearly 97% of the multi-versions columns were missing, and 33% of row poll Johnson column was missing. That's good to know early because it means we're dropping those columns that are missing and that we don't need. Cleaning this dataset had 4 main steps. First, each poll appeared 3 times in the row. In 538 was tracking 3 different forecast models. the polls only, polls plus, and nowcast. I only needed one, so I filtered to just nowcast, which cut the rows from 12,000 down to 4,208. Second, I dropped 5 rows for congregational district like Maine, CD1. Those aren't whole states and would have thrown off states level comparisons. Third, I dropped 19 columns I didn't need. And fourth, I converted the date column from plain text strings into proper date time objects, which was essential for the next phase. Preparing the data means adding the structure the analysis needs. It creates 4 new things. First, a gap column, which is this gap column is the Clinton's percentage minus Trump's percentage. Instead of tracking 2 numbers, I now have one intuitive measure of who leads and by how much. Positive means Clinton was ahead. Second, a month column. I use Panda to bin each poll's end date to the first of its month. Third is the swing flag. I tagged the 11 classic battleground states: Florida, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and all of these states. And then the fourth, I added a long format version of the table using melt function, which stacks Clinton's and Trump's into a single column. Getting to analysis, question 1 was how did national support shift month to month across 2016? The blue line is Clinton and the red is Trump. As we can see, Clinton led national in every single month of the year. Her support stayed in a fairly stable low to mid 40s. Trump, on the other hand, started in the lower 30s and worked his way up. He had a notable dip in the spring, but by the fall, he was in the lower 40s. Clinton never lost her lead, but she was holding a smaller number as November approached. That matters a lot because when we look at the swing stats next, we will see why. Question 2 compares the national polling gap to the swing state gap. Instead of plotting the raw numbers, I plotted the gap, which is Clinton minus Trump. So we can see how and who was ahead and by how much in each month. The dark line is the national gap. The blue line is the swing state gap. So notice how the swing state line is almost always lower, meaning Clinton's lead in the battleground state was consistently smaller than her national lead. And in April, she was up 9 points nationally, but only about 8 in the swing states. But by November, here, It was 2 points nationally and less than 2 in the swing states. Question 3, did the type of voters, asks the question that did the type of voters screen matter in the swing states? Now, likely voters polls represented by LV are supposed to be better predict. They're supposed to better predict who is actually better. And registered voters polls cast a wider net. It casted the wider net. So the answer in this data set is hardly, because in the swing states, the likely voters gap between Clinton and Trump was 2.8 percentage point. And the registered voters gap was 3.1 percentage points. That's almost identical. Both groups told the same story. And it means it was a closer race, but still, Clinton had slightly better points. Question 4 zooms into the 2 specific states, Michigan and Florida. From August through November, these 2 states are the most talked about from this election. Michigan is the blue line and the golden is the Florida. It started August with Clinton up about 6 points, which is the happy look lead, but it narrowed down through the fall, and by November it was down about 2.6 points, where still a Clinton lead, but it was a shrink between the two. So Florida, which is the gold line, was even dramatic because Clinton was up about 2 points in August, but the gap actually flipped to negative in December, meaning Trump briefly led in Florida. It bounced back, but by election day, the gap was less than a point. Both states showed the same warning patterns, that leads that were small or shrinking at the finish. So in the hindsight, both the states went to Trump on election night, and this chart explains why that was like a complete surprise to everyone. So question 5, in the final week, November 1st through November 7th, the day before election day, the question is, which way were the swing states leaning and by how much? The bars to the left represent Trump's lead, and to the right represent Clinton's lead. We can see Iowa, Arizona, and Ohio were all leaning Trump, with Iowa having the most decisively at -4. Clinton was leading in the states of the right, all of this, but most of this leads were in the 2 to 5 points range, so not a really huge, but there was a difference and it was real. So Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin were the three Rust Belt states that flipped to Trump on election night and cost Clinton the Electoral College. So, key takeaways from this analysis is that 1. Nationally, Clinton led every month. Her support was steady, and Trump's support grew but never passed hers. 2. The swing states told a different story. The battleground margin were consistently tighter than the national lead, which was misleading to anyone who was just watching the headline numbers. 3 is that the voters' screen barely mattered because likely voters and registered voters polls gave almost identical results in the swing states. So that's not where the polling error came from. And the fourth takeaway is that the Rust Belts led. They were leading, but the lead was fragile with Clinton because Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin all showed Clinton ahead in the final week, but those margins were small enough that a modest late swing toward Trump could flip them, and that is what exactly happened. So to wrap up, this project walked through the entire 5 phases of data pipeline on a real-world political data set. From a messy 12,000 rows CSV to a clean 5 chart that tells a coherent story. This project used Panda for every phase of loading, cleaning, preparing, and aggregating the data. And then I used Seaborn for all the 5 visualization, Matplotlib for figure and axis control, and the datetime module for the dates, binning, and filtering. Thank you for watching.